So, having talked about intelligence testing in Chapter 10, we will talk about achievement testing in Chapter 11. As a reminder from the previous chapter, intelligence tests are designed to look at an individual's current intellectual ability level. Achievement tests want to know what an individual is able to do right now in the present, so it's meant to capture a level of proficiency in some sort of area right now. And then aptitude tests are future-oriented tests that predict what an individual is capable of doing in the future with appropriate future training and education. So most of you are likely familiar with the idea of standardized achievement testing. These are used quite a lot in the schools, and these test batteries are designed to cover a broad array of content that would be relevant to most U.S. school curriculums. So these kinds of tests are norm-referenced score tests, and that means that one person's score is compared to all the other scores in the norming group. So this is where you see kids with percentile scores that indicate how much better or worse that child did than all other children who have taken the test. And these are used pretty commonly because they have pretty good psychometrics and they have nationally representative norming groups based on grade level. So they're considered to be fairly reliable in terms of the way that they're scored and administered. And so you can do a lot of different things with these tests. You can look at them overall to establish achievement level or monitor progress, identify strengths or weaknesses for students, but you can also create cutoff scores that would be used for like screening for grade levels or ability levels or the need for special services, for diagnosis, a pass-fail in terms of licensure certification. So thinking about even things like the National Counseling Exam, which is meant to show achievement in relation to counseling skills, is a norm-referenced scoring test, so it's the same idea. And then often used in terms of program evaluation. And if you think about it, this is something you hear in education all the time. And a common criticism of U.S. school systems is that they're too dependent on standardized test scores to be representative of students' growth. And really, they're just representative of their achievement in whatever this test is measuring for them. And so you see a lot of conversations about, is this really the best way to measure things that are going on in a school? But regardless, standardized achievement tests are things you'll see quite often in the US-based school systems for these purposes. So generally there are 4 different types of achievement tests that we will explore. There are achievement test batteries, meaning there's a series of assessments that would use together for the purpose of achievement testing. Individual achievement tests, diagnostic achievement tests, and then subject area tests. Achievement test batteries are some of the most common and popular types of standardized achievement tests. And so they're able to look at several different areas of learning across an academic curriculum at the same time. So if you think about it, you've taken these before in school. So when you have your entire class and they come together and you have to do multiple days of achievement testing, some days about math, some days about language arts, some days about reading, some days about science or social studies or other areas. And this is a battery of achievement tests designed to look at different content areas. So it's able to measure different areas of achievement at the same time. And so you'll get scores showing your achievement broken down into those different areas. And so it's meant to be a comprehensive test that has some subtests within to look at these different content areas. And so it gives you an overall measure of learning across a curriculum. And they can break down this information according to grade level, It's a group administered test because usually your whole class sits down and takes it, or your school or your state even sits down and takes it at the same time. And then it's norm referenced based on that group nationally. And so it's meant to determine that individual kids' general standing on various subjects in comparison to others within their grade level. And so then that information is used to make determinations about placement and types of supports that are needed, and grade level placement and those kinds of things in the schools. So one of the most common battery tests that we see is the Stanford Achievement Test. And so this is something that's used in K through 12 schools. It is norm referenced based on a national sample that's usually divided by grade level. And it's a standardized battery of tests that's used to measure achievement for kids kindergarten through 12th grade. There are different subtests within this battery of assessments that include reading, math, science, spelling, language, social science, and listening skills. And then the readouts give different kinds of scores. So there's a raw score. It tells you how many you could have possibly gotten correct and how many you did get correct. It gives you a scaled score, and then your score with that normal curve equivalent, meaning that you're normed on a curve against those in your grade level, and then provides you with comparisons to the national group and your grade equivalent group. So it tells you, it's meant to tell you your achievement based on the range of what part of the school you're in. So if you're in elementary school, if you're in high school, if you're in middle school, and then it gives you composite scores for each of those subtests. So you can see an example of a Stanford Achievement Test in your book, but there's also a couple of examples posted on our course page, both of the types of questions that are asked on this achievement test and an example full readout as you would get it in a school or as a parent. And some of you may have gotten these before for your own children. So you can't really see the full battery test. As you can imagine, it's kept pretty confidential so that they can ensure the validity of the instrument. But there are a couple of examples from the publisher to show the types of questions that they would ask on these types of batteries of tests. So we talked about group tests. Now in terms of achievement testing and individual tests, individual achievement tests are a little different than intelligence tests. So in intelligence testing, we see a lot more individual tests. In achievement testing, we tend to see more group testing. But individual tests are used, and they are administered to assess a broad area of academics from preschool up into high school. And so usually they're used for diagnostic purposes to identify weaknesses in certain subject areas that might require interventions or different levels of support, or can be used with intelligence tests to be able to diagnose things like learning disabilities that would require IEP or 504 supports. So you see a lot of the same folks who developed intelligence tests also creating achievement tests that are meant to be used in connection with each other. So you see Wexler has developed an achievement test to go with their intelligence test. Woodcock-Johnson has also developed an achievement test that goes along with their intelligence test. And these are meant to use together to determine an individual's level of intelligence and achievement in order to see if there are any kind of disabilities present or the need for special education interventions for that child. So the nice thing about using an individual test is that the testing administrator really gets a chance to get to know the child a little bit better and build a bit of a relationship with them. When it's a group test, you're really just kind of passing out lots of tests to a large group of students and not really getting the chance to attend to their individual needs as they're taking the test. So you just sort of get a snapshot of where they are in that moment. But in individual testing, you might be able to get observations or other information to use in addition to the assessments to be able to get a clearer picture of what that student really needs. So building on the individual tests, we have diagnostic exams. These are specifically designed to identify potential disabilities. So these assessments have a much narrower focus, whereas other achievement tests have a more broad focus. They're longer. They have different kinds of items to look more specifically at different potential diagnostic criteria. Whereas typically we'll see in other achievement testing, there'll be shorter batteries or shorter questions and less questions on the batteries. And so these diagnostic exams are a little more specific, require a little more training, and take a little longer to administer. And they are meant to be used in conjunction with other observations, ongoing monitoring student progress, and other sources of information to get a full picture of a potential disability that might be going on. But the primary purpose is to identify and diagnose learning disabilities to be able to improve supports for the students. So some of the more well-known options here are the Key Math 5 or Key Math 3, that's meant to look at math-related ability levels, the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test, clinical evaluation of language fundamentals, diagnostic assessment of reading. So you see how these diagnostic exams are more specific to a certain area to really determine what type of disability might exist there. Next, we have subject area tests. So these are standardized achievement tests that are mainly used to measure specific content area knowledge. So these are not the broad batteries of standard achievement tests that we talked about prior. These are very specific to a certain subject or a certain vocational area. So think about the SAT has subject-specific tests that you can take now, not just the general SAT, but an SAT in like English or math or history, AP exams, or CLEP exams that you would take for placement in college are designed as subject area achievement tests. And so these measure an individual's current knowledge and skills, but also are meant to be a bit of an aptitude test and predict how well someone will do in the future. So sometimes teachers might have to take these in certain subject areas to get certifications in history or math or science or other kind of grade level things as well. So subject area tests are used for licensing and certification. They're also used for students in terms of admissions exams for college, and then they're also used for college placement, for example, using something like the CLEP exam to determine someone's math level or English level, and if they need to take remedial classes before they can enroll in the starter classes in college. So finally, just exploring a few other options in achievement testing that are commonly used. There is achievement testing for adults. So we've talked mainly about achievement testing related to K through 12 schools or getting ready for college, but there are some designed for adults. A prime example is the GED, the General Educational Development Test, which is meant as a high school equivalent. So that's designed for adult learners to take at any point in the developmental process. And then there's the ABLE-2 or the Comprehensive Adult Student Assessment System or the CASAS. So there are some other adult achievement tests that can be used for job placement or for high school equivalency or access to resources, other kinds of things. Then some other tests that are out there, there are state achievement tests. So we've talked about standardized achievement testing, that's comparison based on a national sample. But after the No Child Left Behind bill back in 2001, states have to develop their own achievement tests in order to demonstrate worthiness for federal funding of schools, which is a pretty big criticism of that system, because states have to develop their own tests and then schools get federal funding based on how they do on those tests. So think about like Y-top testing is specific to our state. And so it doesn't really require on these state achievement tests that the schools use any specific national standard to demonstrate proficiency. It just bases this on state norming groups. So, I mean, there's some criticism about how states are really measuring student learning and growth and achievement, and if that's done in a way that's really representative of what the students need, or if it's just done in a way to make sure that they get federal funding for the school districts. So I encourage you to look up state achievement tests and No Child Left Behind. Some of you I know work in the schools and are already very familiar with this idea, but do a little bit of research about the criticisms that are out there in this system and how it impacts schools and greatly disadvantages schools that are in lower income areas as a result of this system. There's also some options like national assessment of educational progress. There's different performance assessments that are meant to look at more vocational-based skills instead of traditional like math and science and reading kind of skills. So there's lots of different options out there in terms of achievement testing to take a look at student growth and learning over time, regardless of age or developmental level.